open the pod bay doors.
Greetings and welcome to another exciting episode of the Cinematic Traveler Podcast. I am your intrepid movie-exploring host, Chris, and on this episode, I am going to be bringing you my review for a film recommended, or demanded, I should say, by the December winner of our movie quote contest. That would be ZW, who has recommended a film that probably surprised a lot of Valentine's dates back in 1991, and that would be The Silence of the Lambs, directed by Jonathan Demme. And I must admit early on, this is one of the most difficult films I've had to review probably in my whole podcasting career. Now you may be asking, is it because this is a modern masterpiece, or is it because this is a overhyped failure of a horror movie? Well, you'll have to listen to find out. There, I teased you a little bit. But I am excited to talk to you about The Silence of the Lambs. Now, if you could do me a favor, whatever you're listening to the podcast on, somewhere on that screen on whatever device you're listening to it on, there is a follow button. If you could please click that follow button, I would greatly appreciate it. It does help me get the show out there to more people, as well as help you get every episode, so you'll never miss one of my amazing reviews and listen to my sexy, sexy voice. Also, if you want to follow me on my social media, you can find me. Instagram's probably the best way to do it, at Cinematic Traveler Pod. I also have a X or Twitter account that is at CMT Pod. Blue Sky is at Cinematic Traveler Pod something. And I also have an email address, thecinematictravelerpod@gmail.com, if you want to go that route as well. So you have plenty of ways to get in touch with me, participate in the contest, so maybe next month you could be the winner and pick a movie for me to review, or you could just follow the show and keep up with all of my amazing posts on social media, he says with a laugh. So I got through that as quickly as I can so we can get into this episode. Before I do, let me just ask you, how are you doing, my beloved listener? I hope 2025 is treating you well and you are keeping up with all of those resolutions. If you're at the gym, you could be listening to the show, and that will help pass the time as you get your workout on, even though you don't need it because you look great. You look amazing. In fact, much like Hannibal Lecter, I could just eat you up. But at any rate, I hope you're doing well. And now that I have buttered you up sufficiently, let's go ahead and move into our review. As always, I do have to over-explain a few things. I'm going to give you my plot synopsis for the film. Now, inside this plot synopsis, I have hidden two movie quotes that are from movies that are kind of maybe a little bit similar to this one. I did struggle with the movie quotes on this one, but I can imagine you will know when I am using them. So if you can identify the movie they're from, get in touch with me. You get a point for each one that you get right. At the end of the month, I add up all the points. Whoever wins gets to pick a movie for me to review next month. But if you are just listening every now and then, you can still participate. I know it doesn't seem cool, but it's okay to be uncool. You can be uncool with Chris. That is everybody's favorite time of the week, and that is to be uncool with Chris. So as I mentioned, The Silence of the Lambs was released, at least here in the United States, on February 14th, 1991. Oh my God. Can you imagine taking your girlfriend out to see this movie? I bet a lot of relationships were ended that night. Or maybe some were like, holy shit, I didn't know you were that kind of freak. Anyway, this is directed by Jonathan Demme, who was a bit on the rise in his career. He had just done movies like Something Wild with a young Melanie Griffith and Jeff Daniels, Married to the Mob with a young Michelle Pfeiffer. Why do I keep saying that? Everybody was young back in 1991. Even I was young back in 1991. And he also directed one of my all-time favorite concert films, Stop Making Sense, which was a show that was recorded of the Talking Heads at the height of their talking-headedness. And you probably know it, but you don't know it, but you've probably seen David Byrne in the giant suit dancing around. I think that was on Girlfriend is Better. I think that's the song he did that one on. Also, they do a great rendition of Life During Wartime. I don't know what kind of drugs they were on, but it is impressive. So You should go check that out. But I'm not here to promote that movie. I'm here to talk about The Silence of the Lambs. In the film, we are introduced to an FBI trainee, Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, as she is traversing an obstacle course. Now, she is stopped halfway through and told by one of her instructors to meet with Jack Crawford, played by Scott Glenn, the head of the FBI Behavioral Sciences Division. And she's supposed to run over there and meet him in his office. So Clarice makes her way quick, fast, and in a hurry. And upon entering his office, she sees a bunch of clippings for the latest serial killer they are trying to catch, Buffalo Bill. So she thinks she's going to be brought onto that case. Instead, he sends Clarice to talk to famous imprisoned serial killer Hannibal Lecter, played by Sir Anthony Hopkins. And he tells her it's a routine interview, but Clarice is still convinced that this has something to do with the Buffalo Bill serial killer case. Now, as Clarice makes her way down to the dungeon cell that Hannibal the Cannibal is held in, she is warned that he is quite a monster, though he might say, "I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve." Hint, hint. Hannibal, being a former psychiatrist, tries to do a little verbal sparring to see if she is worthy of his time, and she stands her ground against these verbal jabs and gains his respect and also his help in finding Buffalo Bill. Now, they must hurry, as Buffalo Bill, played by Ted Levine, has kidnapped his next victim, Catherine, played by Brooke Smith. Unbeknownst to Buffalo Bill, Catherine's mom happens to be a U.S. senator. So all efforts are put forth to catch this maniac. Now, as Hannibal helps Clarice, she begins to question Jack Crawford's theories on who Buffalo Bill is and where Buffalo Bill is, muttering something like, "I'm not sure I agree with you 100% on your police work there, Lou." Hint, hint. Although Lou might have gave that one away. So she follows the leads that Hannibal has given her to one of Buffalo Bill's former victims. She heads out to that young lady's small town. So here, through a little investigation work and following up with some of the former witnesses in the case, she ends up at a house that is actually Buffalo Bill's house. So Clarice confronts him alone, hoping that she can save Catherine. Now, will Clarice silence Buffalo Bill for good, or will Bill get to skin another hump? Well, normally I wouldn't answer those questions, but I probably will in this review. Yeah, you could pretty much guarantee I'm going to do some spoilers in this review. So if you haven't seen The Silence of the Lambs, first of all, what the hell is wrong with you? And number two, go out there and watch it and then come back and listen to the show. I'll be here waiting for you patiently. What else have I got to do? So now, if you are new to the podcast, I do break my reviews down into 3 segments: the good, the bad, and the nitpicky. The good is the stuff that works for me in the movie. The bad is obviously stuff that doesn't. And the nitpicky, these are things that are neither good nor bad, just things they put in these movies, sometimes Hollywoodisms, sometimes just things my weird little brain picks up on that makes me laugh. And as I am trying to do with this podcast, I'd like to make you laugh, because if there are 2 things I like to do on this planet, one of them is to make people laugh, and the other is to find women that are roomy through the hips. Oh, that's terrible. As I mentioned in the intro to this episode, I did struggle mightily with this review. I didn't think I was going to. When ZW recommended the film, she said Silence of the Lambs. I thought, I haven't seen that in a while. It'd be fun to kind of break that down and do a review on it, see if it still stands up through the test of time. And as I was watching it, I did ask the question early, is it a modern masterpiece or overhyped? Well, all right, that was kind of bullshit. We all know it's a modern masterpiece. And that made it so damn hard to review this film because, God, it's a struggle. You're going to find out. So I do apologize if I go in a few different directions and stray off course here and there. I'll try my best to keep this as a normal review, but I don't want to do any retrospective stuff and talk about trivia, maybe here and there. But for most of the part, I do want to try to break this movie down the best I can. Let's start with the good of the Silence of the Lambs. And I guess the easiest thing to say would be everything. As I was watching this movie, I did not realize just how perfect it is. And that's what made it so hard for me to do this review. I'm like, I can't find anything wrong with it. Let's start with the direction. Jonathan Demme, oh my God, he knocks this thing out of the park. The first thing I'm going to bring up, because I'm really a geek about all this stuff, is the camera work through this movie. Oh my God, there are some great tracking shots. It begins early on. I mean, when Clarice is headed into Jack Crawford's office, the camera sort of follows her in there in one tracking shot. And it does something that I love. I brought this up on another episode not too long ago, where the camera kind of moves in with the character, and then she sees something and is reacting to it, and we don't see it at first. And the camera's kind of moving around, and it just adds to the tension, because you're like, oh my God, what is she looking at? What has got her attention? And then it just shows the clippings of all the Buffalo Bill stuff to, again, use the camera to tell you what the hell is going on, which is brilliant in and of itself. But I love that shot. There's another tracking shot as she's, of course, going to see Hannibal the Cannibal all the way down into the damn dungeon. When she's going down there being led by Dr. Chilton, oh, that guy, that creepy little bastard. You know, in a movie with 2 serial killers in it, he comes off as maybe the worst villain in the whole movie because he's always trying to hit on her. He's just so gross. But at any rate, that's a great tracking shot. It leads all the way up, especially as it's going through the cells. And you have all those crazy people, and you got multiple MIGs who's yelling out, I can smell your cunt. You know, and they're all just crazy. And then it just pans over to Hannibal Lecter standing behind that glass. And he's perfectly still and calm, as just a normal dude. You wouldn't think he would be someone that would be in there just by his demeanor and the way Anthony Hopkins is playing him, which we'll get to later. But it's such a great shot. So classic. I mean, come on. Who didn't get unnerved by that? It's almost creepier that he wasn't one of those weirdos. You know what I mean? Those other people are bouncing off the walls, and he's just standing there like, hey, how are you? And there's another great tracking shot in Buffalo Bill's house where it kind of glides through, and you see the pit that Catherine's being held in, and then it glides into the back, and you see like him sewing the woman's suit together and how gross that is. Just some amazing camera work. Like I said, there's a lot of it where it's moving into places, and you wait a little longer than what the character sees. Again, just heightens that tension. It's so smart when you use camera that way. Also, there's a lot of close-ups, which I saw this in some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. He wanted the close-ups of like Hannibal Lecter or whatever Clarice is looking at. He wanted those characters looking directly into the camera. But whenever you see a close-up of Clarice, she's kind of looking off to one side or the other. And that's just to give you that feeling that you're in her shoes when you see like Hannibal Lecter right in your face, or when she sees Buffalo Bill and all that stuff. It just, again, it heightens the tension because it puts you in the shoes of this character who's going through this horrible adventure, I guess you could call it. And you're seeing a lot of it through her point of view. And you can get her uncomfortableness in those situations as well as when she's in other situations, like when they go to do the little bit of the autopsy on the body they find in West Virginia, and she's surrounded by all of these police officers, police officers in this room, and it just shows their faces, how they look at her and stuff. So it really conveys a lot of emotion and creepiness, as well as heightens that tension. You're just on edge. I think this whole movie, you're always just kind of on the edge of your seat. That's where I think Hannibal plays so well, because he kind of has those moments where he adds a little of his dark humor into these moments. Did you kind of laugh about it, but it eases that tension just enough so when you get to the next one, you're ramped back up. So it's kind of like a little bit of a roller coaster ride. But yeah, there's atmosphere all over this movie. The way the jail cell looks when Hannibal's in it. That one, they did have bars very early on, and they were going to film through that, but they couldn't get all the close-ups right. So that's when they came up with the plexiglass or the glass walls of the cell, so you could actually see the performances better. But yeah, you feel like you're following her into some level of hell as she's descending down into this prison. And again, it does oh, am I going to say it? Subvert your expectations, because as she's walking down there with all those horrible people, and then bam, there's his clean cell, and he's clean and pristine and well put together. So again, it just adds to it. Buffalo Bill's house is just kind of gross and nasty, and there's dirty dishes, and there's like porn on the wall, and all these weird things, and it just plays with your mind because you're like, oh, this is so gross and nasty. Is she gonna get out of here? Oh God, I hope she doesn't get caught. All that stuff. Also, the pacing and the editing of this movie, oh, jeez. God, I tell you, I could go on and on at the perfection of this movie. It never lets up from start to finish. As I said, you're always on the edge of your seat. You're always worried for somebody, whether it be Clarice or Catherine or Precious the dog. I mean, there's somebody in this movie that you're always like, no, please get out of the scene. What's going to happen next? And it just moves right along. And then next thing you know, Hannibal is on that island having an old friend for dinner. But I did mention the editing. It looks great, but there's some really cool moments where someone will say something like, I can't remember the exact line, but someone says something about, oh, this is a monster. And it cuts to Buffalo Bill's house, I think, or maybe it cuts to something with Hannibal Lecter. I don't know. But it was cool because they would have someone say a line of dialogue and it kind of cut into the next scene that involves whatever that is, either Buffalo Bill or Catherine, because I think they say something about, oh, we got to hurry before he finds his next victim, and then they cut right to her in the car singing American Girl by Tom Petty, which is a song that you can never listen to the same again after you watch this movie. In fact, I would recommend for any woman, if that song ever comes on the radio, just to turn the channel instantly, because some bad news is coming. But yeah, I mean, the filmmaking process through this whole movie is great, and they do it all in under 2 hours. Again, I will bring this up from time to time with some of these movies that I go see now that are 2.5, damn near pushing 3 hours, and then you find something like this, and you're like, they could make this movie so perfect. It hits on all cylinders. It does everything wonderfully from start to finish, and it's less than 2 hours long. So if they can do it, then I know the filmmakers nowadays can do it. So as much as I could just geek out about the direction of this movie, let's move into the other obvious greatness of this movie, and that is the performances. Of course, should we start? We have to start with Sir Anthony Hopkins. Come on, Hannibal Lecter. I mean, you talk about an actor just absolutely nailing a role. This is it. And it is iconic. I mean, everybody knows who Hannibal Lecter is. If you went to someone who's just a passive film fan and you were like, Hannibal the Cannibal's behind you, they would be like, oh no. If you went to a Halloween party now at 2025 dressed as Hannibal the Cannibal, people would know who you are. Probably stay away from you, especially if you're strapped to a hand cart with that mask on your face. God, what a great image that is, isn't it? Oh, this movie. But he, dare I say, kills it in this role. Is there anything I need to say? Come on. Like I just mentioned earlier, the dark humor that he adds into the film, I mean, that starts really early on when he first meets her after multiple MIG says, I can smell you, cunt. And his response is, I obviously cannot. What a great reply to that line. But he has his moments where he's testing her, but the more that she is standing up to him or is opening up to him about her past, because you have some flashbacks about what happened to her as a kid, you see that he slowly begins to care about her, and he wants to help her because he knows she's ambitious and wants to be an FBI agent. But he also understands, and I think it's an amazing moment in the movie that I didn't really notice, or maybe I hadn't, just kind of forgot about it. But as she is telling him about her childhood and what happened to her dad, he's not looking at her. He turns his head away every now and then. But when she tells him that, he just closes his eyes as like this look of, what a horrible thing for her to go through as a child. So you see him really connecting with her, but also he keeps his jabs coming at her constantly. He's always got his smart-ass comments. I like when she visits him in the cell after they moved him, and she walks up. He's like, if you keep showing up, they're going to think we're in love. God, he was just so good at that movie. And then the other thing that he does so great is he is a likable character. Like, and it almost feels bad by the end of the movie that you like this guy, because when you see him become Hannibal the cannibal and how violent he can be and what he does to those two police officers that are guarding him and everybody else that they tell, oh, he killed this tourist and the people on the ambulance. And you go, oh, yeah, that's right. This guy is a vicious monster. But Anthony Hopkins plays him in a way where, like I said, through most of the movie, you kind of like him. He makes you laugh. He's got this charisma about him. He's an interesting character. And you can't help but think, I probably would have ended up in his air fryer. Because he seems like a great guy and you'd want to hang out with him. And next thing you know, he's serving a rack of crisps. And I don't know, is there a need to go on? I mean, obviously it's a great performance because Anthony Hopkins won his first Oscar for the role, in which he was only on screen, I think, 24 minutes. So it was one of the shortest screen times for any best actor in a leading role. Speaking of Oscar winners, let's head on over to Jodie Foster. Now, before I continue on too far into her, Anthony Hopkins had been around acting since the 60s, but he has always been kind of a character actor, wasn't really well known. So this sort of launched him into this bigger phase of his career. Now, Jodie Foster, as all you film buff fans know, she's been around forever. She was in Disney movies when she was a kid. Of course, she had her amazing performance as the child prostitute in Taxi Driver. And before she won an Oscar for this role, she had already won an Oscar for Best Actress in a Leading Role for The Accused. So really, it wasn't so much a surprise that she puts in a great performance, because obviously throughout her career, Jodie Foster has put in some amazing performance. But with Clarice, she brings a really interesting character onto the screen, because Clarice is, I hate to say, a strong female character. And yes, we did have those before 2016, believe it or not. But she also has her vulnerable side. She also has her moments of failure. They show that in her training where she forgets to check a corner, and that comes back later in the movie. But when she goes in and she deals with Hannibal the cannibal the first time and what he puts her through, and then you had multiple MIGs throwing his jizz at her face and all that. I was just like, just so goddamn gross. At any rate, even though at this point in my dating life, that doesn't seem like a bad option. But she takes this moment where she's in front of Hannibal and she has to be strong. And she has her moments of vulnerability in front of him. And you can see that on her face. But she contains that because she knows she can't show him weakness, especially at that moment. And she has to stand her ground against him, which is one of the things that earns her some respect from him and starts them on their path, because he doesn't expect that. He expects her just to wilt under the pressure. But as the scene ends and she goes out to her car, she breaks down and she's crying and stuff. And that just shows that she's a human being. She isn't some badass FBI agent or anything like that. She's been through some shit, and that would take its toll on anybody. And she goes through moments of the movie where she's scared and where she's confused about what's going on, especially with her handling by Jack Crawford. As I mentioned early on, he sends her in, kind of lies to her and tells her it's just this typical interview that they always do with Hannibal. But it turns out he was using her to kind of get information out of Hannibal. And she doesn't care much for that. And also there's sort of this underlying theme that Crawford plays into as well, and that is just her being a woman and the chauvinistic side of things. As I mentioned, there's a moment where she's in this room with all these male cops and they're all looking down at her. Also, she isn't, I don't want to say is mostly isolated in the FBI training, because she has her friend who helps her, and there's a couple other women, but it's mostly men. Like, there's one great scene early on where she gets in an elevator and it's all male FBI agents and just her. So she is this female character kind of breaking her way into a level at the FBI that most females weren't in, especially at this time frame. So she has to deal with, like I said, men looking down at her or objectifying her. There's a lot of guys checking her out as she walks past them. But also there's a moment that I really liked, because it shows a lot about her character there's a point, and again, it's when they go to do the autopsy on the body they pull out of the river in West Virginia, and she's the only woman in the room, and Jack Crawford, he's talking to the sheriff, but he makes some excuse to take the conversation with the sheriff in another room away from Clarice. And after it's all done, as they're driving away, he asks Clarice, he's like, you didn't really like that, did you? And she said, no, that it's a bad look. And he said something to the effect that he has to do that so that he could get those guys to talk, because they wouldn't talk in front of her. And it makes sense from the male point of view, like it seems logical. But then she says, you're right, but that's not what they see. They see me as being inferior, and that's what they saw with that moment. And he does go, okay, that makes sense. So I like that part of this film as well. There's a little bit of that is handled very well throughout this film. I think another point that sort of shows how her as a woman is advantageous is when she finds some clues at the one young lady's house. She goes up to the bedroom, and there's some stuff that's hidden in her music box. And it's kind of one of those things where, at least my interpretation of the scene, is something that a woman would notice, whereas a man wouldn't, because that's not the world we're used to. So throughout the movie, I think there's a nice level of her sort of, I don't want to say breaking the glass ceiling, but kind of pushing back against this male-dominated world. But not in a way where she's, yelling at people and just, I'm smarter than everybody. She still has to learn things from Crawford and at the academy, and from Hannibal the Cannibal. But it just shows that she is this strong character and that she is determined in what she wants to be with the FBI. And again, Jodie Foster, she's just great in the role. And she conveys that toughness as well as that vulnerability. And she's just a likable hero throughout the whole movie that you're rooting for. And of course, those are the two roles that stand out the most. Why wouldn't they? They both won Oscars for the roles, but, other great actors. Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill, or James Gumb. He's great. And Ted Levine, he has done a lot of character acting work. He's been in a ton of stuff. He was in Heat, the Flubber remake with Robin Williams. He's also in Wild Wild West, and I remember him most from being on Monk. And ever since The Silence of the Lambs, you know who Ted Levine is, because his voice is exactly the same. So every role he's in, I always keep expecting him to say, it rubs the lotion on his body, or he gets the hose. I can't do a very good one. But, yeah, he's great as Buffalo Bill. He's also able to play the character with different levels to him, because he has, I don't want to say a softer side, but he does have a softer side, especially for Precious, his dog. Because when Catherine starts first crying and, begging him for help, he's kind of got this sympathy on his face. But then when she stops doing what he wants her to do, then he just turns into this violent maniac. And then the other level is when Clarice finally knocks on the door and walks in, he's just sort of a normal dude talking to her, you know what I mean? So you could see how he could be what we envision a serial killer to be. Plus he has his sort of Ted Bundy way of capturing Catherine with the couch, and he's trying to get some help and all that. So yeah, he's definitely a creepy character that you are scared of really throughout the movie, and he's built up before you even meet him, so you already have this vision of this monster in your head, and he kind of lives up to that. And the rest of the supporting cast is great as well. Scott Glenn, of course, he's always excellent at everything. I just remember him from The Right Stuff as astronaut Alan Shepard. Also, I liked him as the captain of the American submarine in The Hunt for Red October, but he's been in a ton of things, and he gives an excellent performance. Yeah, really, everybody in the cast, top to bottom, is great. You get some pretty cool cameos as well. You get Roger Corman, who helped to get Jonathan Demme into the film industry, started his career as Roger Corman has done for, so many people. I should just do an episode of all the people that Roger Corman has helped really get into Hollywood before they were stars to become these big megastars that they are. But yeah, Roger Corman, he was one of a kind. There's also a cameo of George A. Romero. He's got a little, not even a part, he's just kind of walking in the back. Every time I see him, I'm like, how the hell did he get into this movie? But Chris Isaac's in it as well. He's got a little bit of a part. But yeah, like I said, top to bottom, the cast is brilliant. And of course, they've got some amazing dialogue from screenwriter Ted Talley, who also won an Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs. So when you wrap all of that together, obviously you have a brilliant, brilliant movie, because I mention that Jonathan Demme, he also won the Oscar for Best Director, and The Silence of the Lambs won for Best Picture. So it swept the 5 major Oscar categories, as it were, which was pretty amazing. Especially, well, we'll get into that in a minute. I want to talk about that a little bit. But so we'll move into the bad of the movie, and this is where I really struggled, and I really couldn't find anything. All right, this is the best I could do. Maybe the ending when she's in the house and the lights are out and he's got on the night vision goggles. Yeah, he would have killed her. They would not have taken that much effort. I think in the book, because in the movie he reaches out to touch her hair. And you think in the movie he's just kind of toying with her. But if I'm not mistaken, and someone could correct me on this, but if I remember right, in the book, he sees her hair and he's sort of infatuated with her hair. And that's why he reaches out to touch her hair. And that's when she turns on and shoots him. So I think that's how the book ended. So it had a little more explanation. But here, yeah, she walks into the room and he's standing behind her with a gun. And all he has to do is pull the trigger. He didn't need to pull the hammer back. So she would have been dead. And again, that's a small nitpick. It was exciting. You were on the edge of your seat. And it was kind of different looking. We didn't have a lot of night vision shots back in 1991. So it was kind of a cool effect to watch. So that's the best I could do as far as something had in the movie. Maybe my only other complaint would be that there's some stuff that Hannibal says about this killer that seemed a bit obvious to me. Like when they find the cocoon in the girl's mouth, what does that mean? I'm like, well, obviously he wants to change into something. That seems a bit obvious to me. But there's a couple moments where I was like, you guys should have figured that out. But those, I mean, to call those bad was a stretch. The only reason I didn't call them nitpicky is because I have a category called nitpicky. So let's go ahead and slide into that category, as a matter of fact. And these are things that are neither good nor bad, just Hollywoodisms or whatnot, and little things in the movies I see that made me laugh, and hopefully I can make you laugh. I will say early on when she is on the obstacle course, and I don't know what this is called, but it's like that rope net thing that you see people climb in these movies, like in the military movies. It's not the rope climb itself. It's like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, looks like a net, but it's got a rope and they climb up the side of it. And I always think it would be funny if if there ever was a reason to do that. You know what I mean? You know, like some soldiers are running through the enemy compound and all of a sudden there's this rope net they have to climb. They're like, oh, thank Christ we trained for this. Like nowhere in the world would you ever have to climb a rope like that. It makes very little sense to me, but I don't know. It just stuck out to me in this movie. She's working her way up. That's like, we had all this training on the rope course so that you could infiltrate the James Bond villain comp. Let's see, my next nitpick, and this is one ever since I first saw the movie. And every time I watch the movie, I think the same damn thing. You know, at the end when she's graduating and they have that shot of the big circular FBI cake. My first question is, what kind of cake do you think that? I think that's a cheesecake, but I don't know. I could be wrong. But whatever it is, I want a slice of that cake. Every time I see it, I'm like, God, I need a slice of that cake. Somebody tell me what the recipe was. Somebody make that cake for me, and I will devour it, much like Hannibal devours his victims. Let's see, another nitpick. I will say there's a moment in the movie where Clarice has to go to the bug experts about the moth and what kind of moth it is. And those are about the nerdiest nerds ever nerded in cinema history. And they make the guys from A Big Bang Theory look like the coolest guys that ever walked a planet. Well, I take that back, except the one guy, because he was hitting on Clarice and he had game, and she called him out for it. And he was like, hell yeah, I'm hitting on you. So kudos to you. You might be the leader of all of us nerds. You're the alpha nerd. And my last, this isn't even a nitpick, but I'm going to put it in there because I do want to talk about it, because The Silence of the Lambs, as I mentioned, swept the 5 big categories at the Oscars. And this is a genre film. Some call it a horror film. I am a big horror fan. I wouldn't probably put it there, but it is definitely a thriller with a little touch of horror in it. But at any rate, when at the time it won, it gave horror movies some credibility, because as most of you horror movies fan, we all kind of get lumped into this section of, oh, it's just crap to, scare people, and it's gory and all that garbage that you hear. Well, this sort of had some class to it, as it were, and it won these awards in a surprising manner because it had come out, I think, in February, like almost a year before the next Oscar. So typically movies come out in February and don't win Oscars, and this one swept them, and it was a horror movie. So I have to give love to this film for that. The Oscars, or a lot of awards, they don't really look at certain genres in a good light. Again, horror movies are one of them, sci-fi, action movies, comedies. There are a lot of comedic actors who deserved an Oscar at some point in their career. There's also some horror movie actors that deserved at least a nomination. I think of Toni Collette in Hereditary. Mia Goth in Pearl, I thought she deserved a nomination. Hell, this last year, the young lady, I can't think of her name right now, she was in Smile 2. I think she deserves some kind of credit because she put her heart and soul into that role. So you don't see that very often, and mercifully, we had at least one movie, The Silence of the Lambs, that was able to break on through. So naturally, this movie has to get all the love it can. So my final verdict on The Silence of the Lambs is this is a perfect movie. I mean, what else can I say? If you haven't seen this film, go watch this movie. If you haven't seen it in a while, go rewatch it. Like I said, it's perfect. It was a perfect watch. When I was sitting there doing my notes, I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do an episode on this? Because everything is perfect. You see what crappy little negatives I had to pull out of a hat just to have something to say. Those aren't even worth the effort. It's great. Hannibal Lecter is an iconic character for a reason. And when you watch this movie, you are reminded of it every time. So, yeah, again, an amazing movie. And again, ZW, thank you for recommending it. Thank you for participating in the contest. Although I do have to say, ZW did throw a little shade at you other listeners because she has won back-to-back months now. She's starting to get a little bit of a ego about it. So I don't know. I don't want to repeat some of the words that she used because I don't like to use that kind of language. But she did call out all of you other listeners about yet another victory. In fact, she was so arrogant about it. She has sent me a list of 12 movies, one for each month, that she knows she's going to win for the next year. So come on. I need the rest of you listeners to step up your game. We can't have that in this podcast. And the best way to put a stop to that is start with this episode, go back and listen to the ones from earlier in this month. Also, come back for my next episode. I'm not sure what I'll be reviewing over the weekend. I'm not sure. There's nothing coming out in this movie theater this weekend. I think there's a horror movie I've heard about, so I might check that out. I don't know. But I'm definitely going to have another review this weekend. I also will have an episode on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. That one doesn't have the movie quote contest, but you can still listen to it anyway. So you're going to be getting lots of content over the next few days from me. Yes, I know I can hear you cheering about that now, and I don't blame you. I would want more of me in my life as well. Or as Buffalo Bill said, I'd fuck me good. I could resist. But I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to my podcast. I tell everyone I have the smartest and sexiest audience in all the podcast universe, and you never fail to live up to those high expectations. And as you are traveling around on this blue and green ball, bouncing to the cosmos, I need you to do two things for me. Number one, never help anybody you don't know put a couch into your van. And number two, go out and do that voodoo that you do so well. Punch it.